Hello my friends, this is part 2 in a series of videos on the correct way to calculate secondary progressions. And what we concluded from the first part in this series of videos is that we should be defining a day as the sidereal day, not the solar day. And as I explained in the first video in the series, I'll read from the slide here. One rotation of the Earth that is usually used is a hybrid duration of the combined effect of the rotation of the Earth with the Earth's revolution around the Sun. It's a hybrid. That's clear from the first video in the series, because the solar day is the time it takes for the Earth to return to facing the Sun, and that time is a combination of the speed of the Earth rotating on its axis and the speed with which the Earth is going around the Sun. So it's a hybrid. So it's a combined effect of the Earth spinning on its axis with how far the Earth has traveled in its orbit in one day. A much simpler basis for secondary progression is simply to you might say disentangle that combined effect of the solar day and separate them out so that one spin of the Earth equals one revolution of the Earth. That means that we will use a sidereal day to define what a day is. Then we can, see how the calculations differ. We can do progressions and compare. And that's what I've done over the last year. I've been looking at this, and the evidence so far is that this does in fact work. It's not just the theory, but I think as we apply it, I'm optimistic that the theory and the application, actually looking at charts, is going to agree with each other. So far it does. I'll talk more about that later in this series of videos. Okay, so the Earth spinning on its axis in one day is a sidereal day. The time it takes to return to the same place in the sky, for the Sun to return to the same place in the sky, is a solar day. And so we've already discussed this. I'm proposing to use the sidereal day as the basis of secondary progressions. Okay. And here I mentioned in vibrational astrology, we have a lot of theoretical foundations for astrology. Spin, there's also dimension reduction, the importance of intersecting great circles. All this is discussed in other videos. In short, according to VA theory, we should use the sidereal day. It makes more sense. It's more consistent with the theory. Okay, now, how do we change the solar day to a sidereal day? It's very easy. It's called the Bija Correction. The Western sidereal astrologers back around the 70s or so suggested that we use a sidereal day instead of a tropical day. So this is not a new idea. If you read the books by the Western sidereal astrologers, at least the books I've read, they never make it clear that all they're doing is changing the day to be a sidereal day. I mean, they talk about all this fancy formulas and stuff. What's the point of it all? The point of it, I just explained. The Bija Correction changes the day to be a sidereal day. And even though we're not sidereal astrologers, we agree that we should use a sidereal day. And remember, the word sidereal is just a label. Don't let it bother you. I use the tropical zodiac primarily. Doesn't mean you're changing your zodiac. Sidereal just means related to stars. Anyway, and in sidereal day, as I mentioned in the first video, isn't necessarily even related to the stars. Related to the tropical zodiac, it's still the same duration within the framework that we're doing astrology in. Anyway, we want to use the sidereal day. So we just use the Bija Correction. Now, to select the Bija Correction, I'll show you. It's very simple. When we go in here, I'm looking at a natal chart. I click on progressions. There's a little button here, number of days in a year and month. And for secondary progressions, instead of using the default value, we click on customize value, and there's the Bija corrected. Now, this is a brand new feature I'm just developing. I have not put it in the software yet because I want to test it more and make sure everything's fine. But soon we'll release an update that'll have the anomalistic correction. I'll get to that. But when you go in here now with the series for Kepler software, you won't see the anomalistic correction. You'll just see the Bija correction. Actually, I'm not sure if this is in Kepler as well. Well, anyway, it's definitely in series. I'd have to look and see if it's in Kepler. You click Bija correction, and what it does, look at the difference. If I go back to default value, one day is 365.242,199, etc. days. Slightly less than 365.25. Click on customize value. Click on Bija correction. It's about 1 day longer. 366.2422. So what we're saying is that there are 366 and a quarter sidereal days in a year. And there are 365 and a quarter solar days. So that's the difference. And it will make a difference, and we will look at it. I'm going to show you examples. It will, let's go back to our PowerPoint. If we use the Bija correction, it's actually not only the progressed moon, but all of your aspects change. Well, the moon changes by 1 degree for each 30 years of life. And that changes the timing for a 30-year-old by about a month. So with the Bija correction, the aspects occur about a month different for a 30-year-old. For a 60-year-old, 2 months different. Now, this is especially important for the moon, because if I say, suppose someone's 60 years old. Let's pick the older to see the more dramatic difference. If I say your progressed sun is, conjunct Neptune today versus 2 months earlier or 2 months later, most of us feel like progressions, it's not going to happen exactly when it's exact anyway. 2 months is pretty significant, but for the progressed moon, it's huge, because the progressed moon is only within a degree orb for about 2 months total, 1 month before to 1 month after. And if I say it's 2 months different, the timing of that progressed moon is totally different because it doesn't last that long. And interestingly, I have never relied on the timing of the progressed moon for aspects. The progressed moon sign, it works reasonably well. That's like a 2.5 year period and a few months difference. I'm not looking that closely at that. I'm just looking at the overall effect during those 2.5 years. That works, but I've never used progressed moon aspects. Now I know why. When I use the Bija correction, they make sense. This is not a controlled research study, which is what we want to use in VA. But we just start with personal observations, and all of a sudden, click, my progressed moon aspects make sense for the first time when I use the Bija correction. So that's promising. Again, in vibrational astrology, we're a little skeptical of just personal experience, but as more and more people use the Bija correction, and what I'm saying is that when you get into the serious software, after you install it and you run your progression for the first time, change it to Bija corrected. Anomalistic correction won't make any difference from Bija correction for humans. It only begins to make a difference if you're 400 or 500 years old. I don't know about you, but I haven't done any clients who are 400 years old recently. So, it doesn't matter. But if you're predicting for a country or some other thing that is many hundreds of years old, then it starts to make a difference. I'll show you that probably in one of the next videos in this series. Bottom line is this: use the Bija correction. I'm going to show you examples of exactly what difference it makes in the timing and how you can compare. Okay. You can compare Bija corrected from not Bija corrected and see which one makes more sense from your observations. For me, it looks very, very clear. I've been looking at it for over a year. Every single progressed moon aspect, I look carefully at it, and every single one has timed better with the Bija correction. So, bottom line here, last line on this slide, both theoretically and from observation so far, the Bija correction is recommended. So here I mentioned the Western sidereal astrologers like Cyril Fagan. They had recommended the Bija correction. And I was about a year to 2 years ago, an astrologer, Ron Tiggle, encouraged me. He says, look at that Bija correction. Start doing your progressions with Bija correction. And, I said to Ron, wow, I've always thought about it and I just haven't taken the time to do it. And he said, it just works like a dream. It just works so much better. I started doing it and I had the same observation that Ron has. It just appears to be working from our personal observations. Okay, now, next question. We've established what a day is. Theoretically, and from observation so far, a day is a sidereal day, not a solar day, for the purpose of secondary progressions. Now, what is a year? Let's think about it. Here's an image of the path of the Earth around the sun. And by the way, I've got a credit here for where I got this image from. And as you know, the Earth's path is an ellipse, this egg shape, and the sun is not at the center. It's at one of the foci, one of the focus points. There are two of them for the sun. It happens to be at one of them. There's nothing at the other one. So this point where the Earth is closest to the sun is called the perihelion, and where this Earth is farthest from the sun is called the aphelion. And he gives some, you wouldn't have to worry about this additional information here. That's all we're interested in. And there's the Earth would be going around the sun in this counterclockwise motion, and it'll reach these points of the aphelion once a year, and half a year later reach perihelion, and then come back. So what is a year? We have three choices. A year could be a tropical year. That's a good choice. When the Earth returns to the vernal equinox, the beginning of spring, that's our normal definition of year. Just like a solar day is our normal definition of a day, that's what a year is, because we use years for seasons. The other possibility is you don't want to look at when the sun returns back to the vernal equinox. You want to look when it returns to the same point relative to the stars behind it, which is, of course, a sidereal year. And you know by now, if you've been studying astrology for a while, that this difference between tropical and sidereal, it changes by 1 degree every 72 years by precession of the equinoxes. So it is a significant difference. If we define a year as a sidereal year versus a tropical year, and somebody's 72 years old, it's going to make a difference. So, those are choices. And then we have the anomalistic year. Well, it makes a difference for transits. We'll see if it makes a difference for progressions or not. We'll get to that. And then there's a third choice called the anomalistic year. And that's when the Earth would return to the aphelion, or return to the perihelion. Would be the same thing. There's a word for perihelion and aphelion. They're called the apsides. Okay? Apside means perihelion or aphelion. So in astronomy, they often say an anomalistic year is when the Earth returns to the apsides. A-P-S-I-D-E-S. Apsides means either the aphelion or perihelion, because it doesn't matter. The time it takes the Earth to return to the aphelion is the same time it takes to return to the perihelion, because this ellipse actually spins. It moves around very, very slowly. So the time it takes the Earth to return to the aphelion over hundreds of years is different from the time of a tropical year or a sidereal year. So you have 3 different years. Are they going to affect our calculations? And what is the difference? Well, here is you might say the data. Here's the actual time. A tropical year, you know this. How long is a year? 365 and a quarter days. That's our tropical year. Tropical year means seasons. Okay, it's actually slightly less than 365 and a quarter. That's why we have leap years, periodically and so on. And then we don't have a leap year every 100 years typically. Anyway, it's not exactly 365 and a quarter, but it's close. Sidereal year, how many solar days are in a tropical year? This is solar days. A number of solar days in a sidereal year is very slightly more. Instead of 0.242, it's 0.256. So it's 365 days, 6 hours, 9 minutes, and about 10 seconds. So a sidereal year is very, very slightly longer. There you have it. It's about 21, about 20 minutes, a little more than 20 minutes longer. And then an anomalistic year, the time it takes the sun to return back to the perihelion or aphelion, is very, very, very slightly longer, 4 minutes longer than the sidereal year. So which of these years do we want to use? Now, here is the number of sidereal days in a year. 366.2422. This is the number we should use for our secondary progressions, or maybe we should use this one. There are 366.25968, etc. Sidereal days in an anomalistic year. Here's the bottom line. We want to use sidereal days. That's what I've been talking about all this time in these videos. In the first video of the series and in the second one, we want to use the sidereal day. If we use a tropical year, we're going to use 366.2422 days in a year. But if we use an anomalistic year, it's slightly more. And the sidereal is going to be almost the same as the anomalistic. So the difference between sidereal and anomalistic is trivial, and there's a bigger difference between the tropical and these others. Okay, and here I have some calculations. We don't need to go over this about how we come up 365.25960, how all these numbers, if you compare them to each other, they're all going to add up properly. Now, let's go on to the next slide. Now, here's another way of looking at it. In this series software, we can look at where the Earth's perihelion is. I'll show you. We can go to Ephemeris, and its daily listing of planet, asteroid nodes, perihelion, aphelion, etc. And we can put in a year. So I put in the year, I think I put in the year 1. And number of years. Let me just put 1 here, I'm not sure. And we click on OK. Yeah, that's what I want. It's going to list the planets plus whatever asteroids we selected, and it's telling us where the north node, south node, perihelion, and aphelion are. So the sun, perihelion, aphelion is the same as the Earth. It would be the, the sun. The sun is from the Earth's point of view, and the Earth is from the sun's point of view. So there's the sun. So I have them. So all I did is run this for the years 1 and the year 2000. I just entered 1 and I entered 2000, and I saw how fast they move. And I also looked at the fixed stars positions. I think there's a handy, how did I do this? I think I went to Ephemeris. Oh no, I didn't do it here, entering Zodiac. I just went to the star catalog. You go to the star catalog, current positions, and just change the date, and you have it. I don't need to walk you through all that. Anyway, it's there in the software. You can use the fixed star catalog. And here's what I noticed. That in these 1,999 years, almost 2,000 years, Regulus, I just picked Regulus, it's a big star, and I picked the galactic center. They move almost the same. Regulus moves 27 degrees, 39 minutes. Galactic center moves 27 degrees, 49 minutes. It moves about 10 minutes more than Regulus. So this is something that a lot of people ignore, is that the stars have what we call proper motion. The stars are not fixed. We call them fixed because they're fixed within our lifetimes, and over a few hundred years they hardly move. But over, what's this called, 1,000, over 999 years, the galactic center has moved 10 minutes more than Regulus. That means that the galactic center is moving faster than Regulus. If we think of the galactic center as the stationary point, center of the solar system, Regulus has moved retrograde 10 minutes. So Regulus has a retrograde motion. We don't usually think of stars as having motion. It has a retrograde motion of 10 minutes over 2,000 years, 5 minutes every 1,000 years. That would be 1 minute every 200 years. A very slow retrograde motion. But Regulus is moving retrograde 1 minute every 200 years. So it is moving. And the shape of the constellations changes. Now, very small amount of movement. Of course, some stars are moving faster than Regulus. So they're all have a slight motion over thousands of years. You'll notice it. Now, the Earth's perihelion has moved a little over 34 degrees. So that ellipse, that egg shape of the Earth going around the sun, it's actually spinning. Over 2,000 years, it has spun, almost 7 degrees. If you compare Regulus and the galactic center, almost 7 degrees. The Earth's perihelion has moved almost 7 degrees in relationship to the fixed stars. So the Earth spinning around the sun is a little bit like a top, and it does swirl around. So over very long periods of time, perhaps our calculations could be different if we use an anomalistic year versus a tropical year or a sidereal year. Okay, so how do we know? We can just run progressions and look. We can just see what the difference is and see what happens. So here's my birth chart, and now we're going to look at what difference it makes in the calculations if we use the Bija correction versus the anomalistic correction versus no correction. Let's see what happens. Okay, first thing, I ran my progressed chart, just a progressed wheel, with Naibod. This is the most common method used. And I talk in the other videos about why it's very common, but that's not important. Here's a common progression. For me, excuse me, August 24, 2021. So I just progressed my chart. I just went in the software, progressed my chart, clicked on progression, entered that date. And I selected Naibod. So let me just show you, just so it's clear. I went to progression. Let's see, am I looking at my natal chart? Yes, my natal chart. I went to progression. I put in August 24, 2021. I left it at 12 noon. Secondary progression. And down here I selected Naibod. And I clicked OK. And if I just leave it on Fractal, I get 4 Cancer 45. And when we look at the slide, there it is, 4 Cancer 45. And if I put it on Naibod, I get 4 Cancer 35. So on the right is the fractal house. On the left is the Naibod. The houses are only slightly different. They're 10 minutes later. So I'm 72 years old. They'll change by about 5 minutes for each 30 years of life. In fact, it's better to look at the midheaven because the midheaven moves at a more constant speed, and the difference there is 13 minutes. So for each 30 years of life, it's going to move about 5 minutes later using Fractal Progressed. Okay. So, and I talk more, if you want to know the technicalities of Naibod versus, I explain that in another video. Here I want to focus on pulling all this together and what you should do about it. Of course, that planets are the same. Moon is 18 Aquarius 04, 18 Aquarius 04, because I'm using the same definition of a day in both cases. Now, So on the previous slide, my suggestion is that we use fractal houses. They're correct. Naibod is incorrect. However, here's the big thing that I didn't put together in the previous videos, and this puts it all together. We look at that previous slide, I do not have Bija correction. What we want to do to get the correct progressed chart is we need to use fractal houses and Bija correction. And Bija correction is going to change everything because the length of the day is a sidereal day, not a solar day. So, on the next slide, let's compare the fractal houses with using fractal and Bija, which is what I'm hypothesizing is the actual correct progressed chart. So when you do your progressions in the program, what I'm recommending, I want to go back to the natal, based on theory and a little bit of observation, so we're not 100% sure yet, but what I'm suggesting is select fractal house and select customized value and Bija correction. You can also select anomalistic correction. As we will see, it makes almost no difference in the actual calculations. We'll see that in a minute. It won't affect, if you're doing charts for people, it will not affect the dates. One day. It'll make maybe a 1 day difference, sometimes 2 days for people who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s. Not a huge amount. So very, very subtle difference. So you want to select one of these. And I will talk probably in the next video in this series about what the difference between these two is. But again, it won't make very much difference. The important thing is select Bija corrected, which is the only one actually in the program right now. I will add this after I've tested it some more. We go through a lot of testing and checking with the user interface, everything, before we release things. But you don't need it anyway. Bija correction is fine. Select Bija correction and select fractal houses. Now, let's see what it looks like. I'll progress, look at on my chart. So on the left is my fractal houses, secondary progression fractal houses. If you remember, that's the 4 Cancer 45. Here, secondary progression fractal house method, Bija correction. This, I believe, is the correct chart. This is the correct progressed chart. And look at the moon. For somebody, who's as old as I am, the moon has moved 2.5 degrees earlier. The moon is it'll be about 1 degree for each 30 years of life. So if you're doing a child, of course, it doesn't make much difference. Most of us do mostly adults, so if you're doing an adult who's 30 years old, the progressed moon is going to be about 1 degree earlier. The moon moves about 1 degree a month by forecasting. That means your dates are off by a month. And that's why it's never worked properly for me. With the Bija correction, my personal observation has worked. It works. That was the same observation Ron Tinkle has had. He said to me, David, do it. It's amazing. This is the date I got married. This is the day I got my new job. This is the date I did this. This is the date I did that. They're timing with the Bija correction. And I did it, and I said, whoa, Ron's right. And the Western sidereal astrologers are right. It appears, from observation. We don't have controlled study yet. Now, but notice this. Planets are different, but notice the houses. They've changed a little bit. The fractal house method with Bija correction gives an ascendant of 4 Cancer 35. Does that look familiar? 4 Cancer 35. This is really interesting. Let's go back. 4 Cancer 35 is the Naibod without Bija correction. This is wild. What happens is if you use Bija correction and fractal progressed houses, you get the same exact house cusps as if you did Naibod without Bija correction. Did you follow that? You don't have to be concerned about why, but here's the bottom line way of thinking about it. Most astrologers use Naibod method without Bija correction. our observation, our theory now is that their house cusps are correct. They're correct. In the previous video, I suggested that the fractal house method is better than the Naibod because it theoretically makes more sense, but I had no way to tell, because if your birth time is off by 15 seconds or half a minute or so, the house cusps are going to change this much anyway. And we don't have the birth time down to seconds. It could easily be off a minute or two. So given the accuracy of birth times, we're not able to tell whether Naibod is right or fractal house. So now, looking at this more closely, here's the conclusion. Let me say it again. We should use fractal house method with Bija correction, and that produces the same exact house cusps that most people are using. So, using the usual methods, we are getting the correct houses. 4 Cancer 35 for this particular chart, that's correct, but the moon is off 2.5 degrees. Whoa, the moon is like way, way off. It's not at 18 Aquarius 04. Let's go down to this. It's at 15 Aquarius 35. So, let me say it again, because it's a lot of information. We should use the fractal house method with Bija correction according to theory, and from observation it seems to support it. And notice the time of the progressed chart. It's calculated using the Bija correction for 11/17/52 GMT. Without Bija correction, it's 5 hours late, almost 5 hours later for someone my age. In this particular situation, 16:02:12. So, with Bija correction, you're going to get a different date and time for the progressed chart. And everything has moved. Look at the sun. The sun without Bija correction is 19 Cancer 57. That is the progressed sun, 19 Cancer 57, according to almost 100% of astrologers. And it does not matter what house system you use, we all agree. Let's go back to the Naibod, sun, 19 Cancer 57. Everybody agrees about where those planets are, except Western sidereal astrologers, and except myself, and I think a growing number of people, and Ron Tiggle and more, I think increasingly more people are going to get into this, and the Western sidereal astrologers have known this for, since the 1970s, is that the progressed sun is not 19 Cancer 57 for me on this date. It's 19 Cancer 45. That's 12 minutes. I mean, that's significant. Again, that's going to be over 2 months. All of the transits are off by 2 months. They're actually happening 2 months later for somebody that's 60 years old. For somebody that's 30 years old, all of your progressed aspects are happening a month later. So if you're a professional astrologer and you're consulting a client and you're saying that this progression will happen on such and such a date, if that client is 30 years old, I believe the actual time of it is a month later. Now, let's continue with this in the third section. We're now at about 34 minutes. I like to keep these to about a half hour. So probably it'll be the last, I believe, in this series of videos on how to properly calculate secondary progressions. It might even take more than one more video, because I'm going to show you in the last video timeline format. I'm going to show you actual progressed natal listing, and we'll see the actual dates using fractal and fractal with Bija, just to confirm, to actually see what it looks like, so that when you go to apply this, you'll see what's going on, and just to confirm everything on a practical, hands-on level as a practicing astrologer, to see these differences, not just take my word for it, but actually see it in the timeline as well as in the chart wheel. We see it here in the chart wheel. Let's just see it play out with the dates that we get. In probably it'll be the last video. Okay, my friends, I will end here and then see you in the next third video in this series. Take care. God bless. Namaste.